The royal decree arrived at dawn, sealed with blood and wax, declaring that Dariush, the Alpha King's only son and heir to the throne, would never ascend unless he spoke before his 10th birthday. Pack law was absolute. A silent wolf could not lead. And Dariush had not uttered a single word in 9 years of life. The council had grown tired of waiting. The whispers in the palace halls had turned to demands. And the king, bound by a blood oath sworn to his ancestors, could do nothing but watch his son's future crumble into ash. But before we go further into this story of forbidden love, shattered hearts, and the one woman who would change everything, tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. Because you're going to need it for what comes next. Nasreen had been rejected 3 times before she turned 25. Not for lack of beauty, not for lack of intelligence, but because she was an Omega born under a blood moon, marked from birth as cursed by the old prophecies. Her scent carried the faint trace of nightshade and winter rain, a combination that made alphas uneasy, that made them turn away even as their wolves yearned toward her. The first rejection came from Bahram, a wealthy merchant's son who had courted her for 6 months before his family discovered her bloodline. The second came from Rostam, a warrior who had whispered promises in her ear before the pack elders reminded him that Omegas like Nasreen brought only tragedy to their mates. The third came from Kaveh, who had been brave enough to mark her in secret, only to have the bond severed by force when the Alpha Council discovered their union. Each rejection had left scars. Not the physical kind, but the kind that carved themselves into the soul, that made her wake at night gasping for air, convinced she would never be enough for anyone. So when the palace summoned her to the capital city of Perseball, she assumed it was another cruelty. Another test she was destined to fail. She arrived on a grey morning when frost clung to the palace gates like shattered glass. The guards escorted her through corridors lined with tapestries depicting the great Alpha lineages, bloodlines stretching back 1,000 years, pure and unbroken. She did not belong here. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But then she was brought before the king himself. Sharok sat on a throne carved from a single piece of obsidian, his presence filling the chamber like a storm barely contained. His eyes were the color of molten gold, and when they fixed on Nasreen, she felt the weight of every title he carried. Alpha of Alphas, Keeper of the Blood Oath, Lord of the Western Territories. Beside him stood a boy. Dariush was small for his age, with dark curls that fell across his forehead and eyes that held an ancient sadness. He watched Nasreen with an intensity that made her breath catch. And when she met his gaze, something inside her shifted, a recognition she could not name, a pull she could not resist. The king spoke, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You are Nasreen, daughter of Murdad, of the Nightshade bloodline." It was not a question. It was an accusation. She bowed her head. "I am, my lord." "Then you know why you have been rejected. Why your kind are forbidden from taking mates within the pack hierarchy." "I know." Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "I have lived with that knowledge every day of my life." The king studied her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He gestured toward his son. "My heir does not speak. The healers say there is nothing physically wrong with him. The shamans say his wolf is trapped inside, unable to surface. And pack law states that a silent alpha cannot rule." He paused, and the pain in his eyes was raw, unguarded. "You are a teacher. I have been told you work with the rejected children of the outer territories. That you have methods others do not understand." Nasreen's heart began to race. "My lord, I don't. I am not asking you to cure him." The king's voice cut through her protest like a blade. "I am asking you to teach him. To find whatever language lives inside him and draw it out. You have 6 months before his 10th birthday. If he does not speak by then, the council will invoke the right of succession. They will remove him as heir and place his cousin Hormuz on the throne instead." The politics of it crashed over Nasreen like a wave. Hormuz was known throughout the territories as ruthless, ambitious, and cruel. If he took the throne, the fragile peace between the packs would shatter. "And if I fail?" she asked quietly. "Then my son loses everything. And you?" The king's expression hardened. You will be exiled beyond the borders, forbidden from ever returning. It was not a request. It was a sentence. Complete your task or lose everything. Nasreen looked at Dariush again. The boy had not moved, had not made a sound. But his eyes pleaded with her in a language that needed no words. She took a breath and bowed. I accept. The palace assigned Nasreen a chamber in the eastern wing, far from the royal family's quarters. The room was beautiful but cold, with windows that overlooked a garden where frost-covered roses bloomed impossibly in winter. She was given fine clothes, access to the palace library, and strict instructions. She was to spend 4 hours each day with Dariush. No one else could be present during their lessons. She was forbidden from discussing his condition with anyone outside the king's immediate circle. And she was absolutely, under no circumstances, to form any kind of bond with the boy beyond that of teacher and student. The last rule, delivered by the king's advisor Farak with a pointed stare, made Nasreen's stomach twist with understanding. They feared her bloodline. They feared what might happen if an Omega marked by prophecy got too close to the heir. She understood their fear. She had lived her entire life being feared. But when Dariush entered her chamber for their first lesson, all those warnings evaporated. He moved like a ghost, silent and careful, his small hands clutching a leather-bound journal. He sat across from her at the low table she had prepared and waited, his eyes never leaving her face. Nasreen had taught many children over the years. The rejected ones, the broken ones, the ones the packs had given up on. She knew the look of a child who had been told they were not enough. She saw it in Dariush's careful stillness, in the way he held himself apart, as if afraid his very presence might cause disappointment. Hello, Dariush, she said softly. My name is Nasreen. I'm here to learn from you. His eyes widened slightly. Most teachers, she knew, would have said they were here to teach him. But Nasreen had learned long ago that the greatest lessons came from listening. She pulled a piece of parchment and a stick of charcoal from her bag and placed them in front of him. I don't need you to speak, she continued. I need you to show me how you see the world. For a long moment he did nothing. Then slowly he picked up the charcoal. He drew with fierce concentration, not the careful, studied lines of someone trained in art, but wild, instinctive strokes that captured emotion more than form. He drew wolves running beneath a full moon. He drew a boy standing alone in a forest. He drew hands reaching for each other across an impossible distance. When he finished, he looked up at her with a question in his eyes. Nasreen studied the drawings, her throat tight. You're not silent, she whispered. You're just speaking in a language no one has bothered to learn. Something broke open in Dariush's expression, a crack in the careful mask he wore. His hand moved across the parchment again, faster now, and he wrote a single word in the old script. Loan. Nasreen reached across the table and placed her hand over his, careful and gentle. Not anymore. The lessons became the center of both their worlds. Nasreen discovered that Dariush did not speak because he could not find words that matched what he felt inside. The language of the pack, the formal hierarchical structure of alpha commands and pack responses, felt foreign to him, like clothes that did not fit. He thought in images, in emotions, in the pure wordless communication that wolves used before humans shaped their mouths around speech. So Nasreen taught him differently. She taught him sign language, yes, but more than that, she taught him the language of art, of music, of movement. She taught him that communication was not about forcing yourself into someone else's mold, but about finding the truest expression of your own soul. They spent hours in the library, surrounded by ancient texts written in scripts long forgotten. Dariush would copy the symbols, not for their meaning, but for their beauty. He would arrange them into patterns that told stories without words. They spent afternoons in the garden, where Nasreen would play a wooden flute and Dariush would move to the music, his small body finding rhythm and meaning in the melodies. His movements were not dance, they were conversation. Each gesture held intention, each turn spoke volumes. And slowly, something else began to happen. Nasreen started to understand him on a level that defied explanation. She would know what he needed before he gestured for it. She could read his emotions in the set of his shoulders, the tilt of his head. When he was frustrated, she felt it like a sharp edge against her own heart. When he was happy, her chest filled with warmth. It was a bond. She knew it. And it terrified her. Because bonds between Omegas and Alphas, even young ones who had not yet presented, were forbidden outside of formal matings. And matings between cursed bloodlines and royal heirs were impossible. She tried to maintain distance. She reminded herself every morning that she was here to teach, nothing more. But Dariush made it impossible. He looked at her like she was the only person in the world who truly saw him. He drew pictures of them together, teacher and student, standing side by side against the darkness. And Nasreen, who had been rejected so many times, who had learned to expect abandonment, found herself caring for this silent boy with a fierce protectiveness that scared her. The first public betrayal came 2 months into their lessons. Nasreen had been summoned to appear before the council, a gathering of the most powerful alphas in the realm, including Hormuz, the cousin who stood to inherit if Dariush failed. They met in the Hall of Ancestors, where the bones of past alpha kings lined the walls in elaborate casings of glass and gold. Hormuz was everything Dariush was not. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that commanded attention and eyes that calculated every advantage. When he looked at Nasreen, she felt like prey being assessed. "The Omega teacher," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Tell us, has the heir spoken yet?" Nasreen stood before them, alone and exposed. The king was not present. This was the council's domain. "Prince Dariush communicates," she said carefully. "He expresses himself through." That was not the question. Farak, the king's advisor, interrupted. His loyalty to Sharak was well known, but he was also bound by pack law. Has he spoken words? Has his wolf emerged? Not yet, but... Not yet. Hormuz rose from his seat, circling her like a predator. The boy has 2 months until his 10th birthday. 2 months until the blood oath demands a decision. And you stand here telling us he communicates through pictures and movement. He laughed, and others joined him. This is what happens when we allow cursed bloodlines into the palace. They teach our heirs to be weak. Nasreen's hands clenched at her sides. Prince Dariush is not weak. He is simply different. If the pack cannot understand that, the pack requires strength. Hormuz's voice echoed through the hall. Not difference. Not special accommodations for children who cannot fulfill their basic duties. The boy is broken, and this Omega is wasting our time with her sentimental notions. Enough. The king's voice cut through the chamber like thunder. Nasreen had not heard him enter, but suddenly Sharak stood at the entrance, his presence silencing every voice. He looked at Hormuz with barely contained rage. "You forget yourself, cousin." But Hormuz did not back down. "I forget nothing, my king. Pack law is clear. You may be alpha of alphas, but even you cannot change what was sworn in blood. If Dariush does not speak, with words in the manner expected of an heir, he cannot rule. And we both know what that means." The room held its breath. Sharak turned to Nasreen, and for the first time she saw true fear in his eyes. Fear for his son. Fear for his legacy. "Leave us," he said quietly to her. She bowed and fled, her heart hammering against her ribs. That night, Dariush came to her chamber. It was forbidden. Students did not visit their teachers' private rooms, especially not royal heirs. But he slipped through her door like a shadow, his journal clutched to his chest, his eyes red from crying. Nasreen should have sent him away, should have summoned a guard. Instead, she knelt before him and opened her arms. He collapsed into her embrace, his small body shaking with silent sobs. She held him, rocking slightly, whispering words of comfort that he could not hear through his grief. After a long while, he pulled back and opened his journal. He had drawn a new picture, him standing before the council, surrounded by wolves with bared fangs. And in the corner, small and alone, was Nasreen. He pointed to her figure, then to himself, then made a sign she had taught him. Together, Nasreen's vision blurred with tears. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "No matter what they say." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they might be a lie. Because the council was closing in, and the deadline was approaching, and she still had no answer for how to help Dariush speak in the way they demanded. That night, after Dariush finally returned to his chambers, Nasreen stayed awake reading through the ancient texts in the palace library. She searched for any mention of selective mutism, of wolves whose human and animal sides could not merge, of heirs who had faced similar trials. What she found instead changed everything. Buried in a text written 300 years prior, she discovered a passage about the old language, the original form of communication used by the first wolf shifters before human speech evolved. It was not spoken with the mouth, but with the mind, a form of telepathy that required complete trust and an open bond between souls. The text claimed that some wolves, particularly those of pure ancient bloodlines, were born with the ability to speak this language instinctively. They did not need words because they could share thoughts, emotions, and intentions directly. But the old language had been forbidden 2 centuries ago, deemed too dangerous because it created bonds that could not be broken, that superseded pack hierarchy and alpha commands. The ruling councils had suppressed all knowledge of it, burning texts and exiling those who practiced it. Nasreen sat back, her mind racing. What if Dariush was not broken? What if he was simply born to speak a language that had been erased from history? And what if she, marked by a cursed bloodline that made other wolves uneasy, was born to hear it? The next morning, she requested an audience with the king. Sharrak received her in his private study, a room lined with maps and battle strategies. He looked like he had not slept, dark circles shadowing his golden eyes. "Nasreen." He gestured for her to sit. "Farak tells me the council grows more aggressive. Hormuz has begun calling for an early succession vote. My lord, I need to ask you something." She leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Has Dariush ever communicated with you directly? Not through gestures or drawings, but through feeling, through thoughts that appear in your mind?" The king's expression shifted. "What do you know of the old language?" Her heart leapt. "Then it's real. He can speak it." It was real. Sharrak stood, pacing to the window. "My great-great-grandfather possessed the gift. He could speak mind to mind with his mate, his children, his closest warriors. But the councils feared it. They feared bonds that could not be controlled, that could bypass their authority. So they made it forbidden, punishable by death." He turned back to her, his face grave. "If Dariush possesses this ability and the council discovers it, they will not crown him. They will kill him." The words hit Nasreen like a physical blow. "But Pack law states he must speak. It does not specify how. Pack law assumes speech means words spoken aloud." The king's voice was bitter. "The council will not accept telepathy as valid communication. To them it is witchcraft. A dangerous mutation that must be eliminated." Nasreen's mind worked frantically. "Then we teach him to speak both ways. We honor what he can already do, and we help him find his voice the traditional way as well." "In 2 months." Sharrak shook his head. "It's impossible." "It's not." Nasreen stood, desperation making her bold. "Because I think I can hear him. I think that's why no one else could reach him. They were speaking the wrong language. But I can learn his. And I can teach him ours." The king stared at her for a long moment. Then quietly, "If you bond with him through the old language, it cannot be undone. Do you understand what you're offering?" She did. A bond like that would tie her to Dariush for life. Would make it impossible for her to take another mate, to build a different future. She would become forever connected to a boy who might never ascend the throne, who might be executed if the truth came out. But when she thought of Dariush's eyes, of his silent plea for understanding, the choice was not difficult. I understand. The training began in secret. Every night, after the palace slept, Nasreen would go to Dariush's chambers. They would sit across from each other in the darkness, and she would open her mind the way the ancient text described, not forcing but allowing, creating space for connection. The first few nights, nothing happened. But on the fourth night, she felt it. A whisper at the edge of her consciousness, like someone calling from a great distance. Teacher. Nasreen gasped aloud. The voice was Dariush's, but younger somehow, more vulnerable. It echoed inside her skull with crystalline clarity. I'm here, she thought back, not sure if it would work. The joy that flooded through her. His joy nearly brought her to tears. For the first time in his life, Dariush had been truly heard. They practiced every night after that. He would send her images, emotions, complex thoughts that unfolded like flowers in her mind. She would respond in kind, showing him her own memories, her own fears and hopes. The bond between them deepened with every session, until she could feel his presence constantly, a warm glow at the back of her awareness. But they also worked on speech. During their day lessons, Nasreen used every technique she knew. She sang with him, encouraging him to match tones. She practiced breathwork, showing him how to let sound flow without forcing it. She rewarded every small noise he made. A hum, a sigh, a sharp exhale, as if it were a grand achievement. And slowly, impossibly, Dariush began to change. He hummed along when she played her flute. He made small sounds of frustration or happiness. His wolf, which had never emerged, began to stir inside him. Nasreen could feel it through their bond, a wild presence that had been locked away for too long. 6 weeks before his birthday, Dariush spoke his first word aloud. They were in the garden, practicing as usual, when a frost butterfly landed on Nasreen's hand. Its wings were crystalline, catching the weak winter sunlight. Dariush reached out to touch it, and his face lit with wonder. Beautiful, he whispered. The word was rough, barely audible. But it was real. Nasreen's eyes filled with tears. She pulled him into a fierce embrace, and through their bond, she felt his overwhelming pride mixed with fear. He had done it. But could he do it again? They practiced the word over and over until it came more easily. Then they added others. Mother, father, wolf, Each word was a victory. Each sentence a miracle. But time was running out. And the council was watching. Hormuz's patience had ended. He appeared at one of their lessons 5 weeks before the birthday deadline, flanked by 3 council members. They swept into the chamber without warning, without permission, their eyes cold and assessing. Show us, Hormuz demanded, looking at Dariush. Show us what this Omega has taught you. Nasreen stepped forward protectively. This is a private lesson. You have no right. We have every right. Farak was among them. His expression apologetic but firm. Pack law allows the council to assess the heir's progress at any time, especially when succession hangs in the balance. Dariush stood frozen, his small frame dwarfed by the alphas surrounding him. Nasreen could feel his terror through their bond, could feel him retreating inward. It's okay, she sent to him. Show them what you can do. But Hormuz was circling them. His lip curled in disgust. The boy still cannot speak. Look at him, he is weak, broken, unfit to lead. And this Omega has clearly failed in her task. He can speak, Nasreen insisted. He's been making progress. He just needs more time. Time? Hormuz laughed. We have given him 9 years. How much more time does he need? Until he's 20, 30. Until the packs tear themselves apart waiting for an heir who will never be ready. One of the council members leaned down to Dariush, his voice harsh. Speak, boy. Say something. Anything. Prove that you are worthy of your father's throne. The pressure of multiple alphas bearing down on him, the scent of their dominance flooding the room. It was too much. Nasreen felt Dariush's mind scream through their bond, felt him implode with panic. And then she felt him reach for her, Desperately, instinctively. Their bond flared open like a door kicked wide. And suddenly, everyone in the room could feel it. The connection between them, powerful and unmistakable. The old language, forbidden and dangerous, radiating through the space like lightning. Hormuz recoiled as if burned. "Blood magic," he hissed. "The Omega has bonded with the Heir. She has used forbidden arts to corrupt him." "No." Nasreen stepped between Hormuz and Dariush. "I have taught him. That is all. What you feel is simply nothing." Hormuz's eyes glittered with triumph. "You have created a bond with the Heir through the old language. A practice that has been outlawed for 200 years. The penalty is death." He looked at the council members. "For both of them." Farak looked stricken. "Hormuz, we must consult the king. The king is bound by the same laws as everyone else." Hormuz moved toward them, and the other alphas closed in. "Guards! Arrest the Omega for use of forbidden magic. And take the boy to the tower. He will remain there until the council decides his fate." Everything happened too fast. Guards poured into the chamber. Nasreen tried to fight, tried to reach Dariush, but they pulled her away. The last thing she saw before they dragged her through the doors was Dariush's face. His mouth open in a silent scream. His hand reaching for her across an impossible distance. Through their bond, she felt his voice one last time. "Nasreen." And then the connection was severed as they locked a collar of cold iron around her neck, a device designed specifically to block telepathic bonds. Silence crashed over her like a wave. She was alone again. They threw her into the dungeons beneath the palace. The cell was small, damp and dark. The iron collar pressed against her throat, cutting off not just her bond with Dariush, but her connection to her own wolf. She felt hollowed out, empty, less than human. She had no idea how long she sat there. Hours. Days. Time became meaningless in the darkness. Finally, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Key turned in the lock. And Sharak entered, looking like he had aged a decade. He knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he checked her wounds, bruises from where the guards had been too rough, cuts from the iron collar. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you better. Where is Dariush?" Nasreen's voice was hoarse. "Is he?" "He's alive. They have him in the tower under guard. Hormuz has convinced half the council that he's been corrupted by dark magic, that the bond you share proves he's unfit to rule." The king closed his eyes. "They're calling for an emergency succession. Tomorrow at dawn, they will vote to remove Dariush as heir and crown Hormuz instead." "You can't let them." Nasreen grabbed his arm. "He can speak now. He was so close. If they would just give him a chance." "They won't." Sharak's voice was hollow. "And even if they did, the bond you share would condemn him. Hormuz is using it as proof that Dariush is weak, that he needs an Omega to think for him. Every argument I make, he twists against us." Nasreen felt despair wash over her. She had tried to save Dariush, and instead she had destroyed him. Her cursed bloodline had brought exactly the tragedy everyone had warned about. "There's more," the king continued quietly. "Hormuz has called for your execution. Tomorrow after the succession vote, they will take you to the judgment stone. You will be charged with using forbidden magic to corrupt the heir, and the sentence is death." The words should have terrified her. But all Nasreen could think about was Dariush, alone in the tower, believing she had abandoned him. "Let me see him," she begged. "Just once. Let me say goodbye." The king looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached up and unlocked the iron collar. The moment it fell away, the bond rushed back, weaker now, strained by distance and fear, but still there. Still connecting her to Dariush across the palace. She gasped as his emotions flooded through her. He was terrified, confused, calling for her through the bond with increasing desperation. "I'm here," she sent back. "I'm still here." The relief that came back nearly broke her heart. Sharak helped her stand. "I'm taking you to him. We have one night. Make it count. The tower was the highest point in the palace, reserved for prisoners of royal blood who could not be placed in common dungeons. Dariush's chamber was at the very top, guarded by 2 warriors loyal to the king. Sharok dismissed them and opened the door himself. Dariush stood at the window, silhouetted against the starlight. When he heard the door, he spun around, and then he was running, crashing into Nasreen's arms with enough force to nearly knock her over. She held him tight, feeling him shake with silent sobs. Through the bond, his voice poured out in a desperate stream. "They took you. Thought they killed you. I couldn't feel you anymore. I tried to tell them but I couldn't, the words wouldn't come, and everyone was so angry. It's okay. I'm here now." She pulled back to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. He had a bruise on his cheek, someone had struck him. Rage flooded through her, hot and violent. "Who hurt you?" Dariush glanced at his father, and the king's expression darkened. "Hormuz," Sharok said. He claimed the boy attacked him. The guards who witnessed say otherwise, but their word doesn't matter to the council. Nasreen turned to the king, her voice fierce. "You're the alpha of alphas. You can overrule them. You can. I am bound by the blood oath." Sharok's hands clenched at his sides. "The oath I swore states that I will uphold pack law above all else, even above my love for my own son. If I break that oath, my wolf will turn on me. I will die and the pack will fall into chaos. Hormuz knows this. He is using the law against me and I cannot stop him." The trap was perfect. Sharok was the most powerful alpha in the realm, but he was powerless to save his own son. Nasreen looked at Dariush, an idea forming. Terrible, desperate idea. What if he challenges Hormuz? Both Sharok and Dariush stared at her. "Pack law allows for challenges," she continued, speaking quickly. "If Dariush believes he's being wrongly removed from succession, he has the right to challenge the decision through trial by combat." "He's 9 years old," the king said flatly. "Hormuz would kill him. Not combat with swords. Combat with words." Nasreen knelt before Dariush, looking into his eyes. The old trials weren't always physical. Sometimes they were tests of will, of wisdom, of the ability to lead through speech. If Dariush can stand before the council and speak, truly speak with his own voice, and if he can make them understand what he's capable of, they cannot deny him. "They'll never agree to it," Sharok said. But there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. "They will if you invoke the right of first voice," Nasreen countered. "It's ancient law, older than the blood oath. Every heir is entitled to speak in their own defense before the council makes a final decision. Hormuz cannot deny that without looking like a tyrant." The king considered this. Then slowly he nodded. "It might work. But Dariush." He looked at his son. "Can you do this? Can you stand before the council and speak?" Dariush's fear pulsed through the bond, but so did his determination. He looked at Nasreen, and through their connection, she felt his question. "Will you be there?" "Every moment," she promised. "Through the bond. I'll be speaking with you." He took a shaky breath. Then aloud in a voice rough but clear, "I can do it." Sharok's eyes widened. It was the first time he had heard his son speak in 9 years. The king dropped to his knees and pulled Dariush into an embrace, his shoulders shaking. For a long moment they held each other, father and son, reunited by a voice that had been silent for too long. When they finally pulled apart, Sharok stood and straightened his shoulders. The grief in his eyes had been replaced by the fierce determination of an alpha king. "Then we fight," he said. "Tomorrow at dawn, Dariush will invoke his right of first voice. And we will show the council exactly what kind of heir he is." The night before the trial was the longest of Nasreen's life. She was returned to the dungeons, but without the iron collar this time. Sharok had argued that blocking her bond with Dariush would interfere with his ability to prepare his defense. The council had reluctantly agreed, though Hormuz had insisted on doubled guards to prevent her escape. She didn't want to escape. She wanted to be there for Dariush, to help him face what was coming. Through the bond they talked all night. She coached him, encouraged him, helped him find the words he needed. They practiced his statement over and over until the sentences came smoothly, until his voice grew stronger. But beneath the preparation, they both knew the truth. Even if Dariush spoke perfectly, there was no guarantee the council would accept him. Hormuz had spent weeks poisoning their minds against the idea of a weak heir. And Nasreen's presence, her bond with Dariush, would be used as evidence that he couldn't lead alone. As dawn approached, she felt Dariush's fear spike through their connection. "What if I fail?" "You won't," she sent back fiercely. "You are strong. You are brilliant. You are everything an Alpha King should be. And no matter what happens, I am so proud of you." Oz. Then, quietly, "What will happen to you?" Nasreen closed her eyes. They both knew the answer. Even if Dariush succeeded, she was still facing execution for using forbidden magic. The best outcome was that he would live and lead while she died. "Don't think about that," she said. "Just focus on tomorrow. On showing them who you really are." But Dariush was not a child to be distracted so easily. "I won't let them hurt you," he sent, and there was an edge of steel in his young voice that reminded Nasreen exactly whose son he was. "If I become heir, my first order will be to pardon you. You can't. And I will." His determination flooded through the bond. "You saved me, Nasreen. You saw me when no one else would. I'm not going to let them take you away." Tears slipped down Nasreen's cheeks. This boy, this wonderful, fierce, impossible boy, was willing to use his first act as heir to save the cursed Omega who had bonded with him. The council would see it as proof of his weakness. But Nasreen saw it as proof of his strength. "Then we win," she said simply. "We both win. Together." "Together," he agreed. And as dawn broke over the palace, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Nasreen felt something shift inside her. She had spent her whole life being rejected, being told she was cursed, being convinced she would never be enough. But Dariush saw her differently. He saw her as someone worth saving, worth fighting for, worth risking everything to keep. And maybe, just maybe, that was the secret language she had been teaching him all along. Not speech, not telepathy, but the language of worth, of dignity, of refusing to accept the labels others placed on you. If she died today, at least she would die knowing she had given that gift to someone who desperately needed it. The guards came for her as the sun cleared the horizon. It was time. The Hall of Ancestors was packed. Every alpha of significance had been summoned to witness the trial. They filled the tiered seats that surrounded the central floor, their eyes fixed on the obsidian throne where Sharok sat. To his right, Hormuz stood with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. To his left, an empty space, where Dariush would soon stand. Nasreen was brought in chains, flanked by guards. They positioned her at the edge of the hall, where she could see but not interfere. The iron collar had been replaced, severing her bond with Dariush once more. She felt its absence like a missing limb. Then Dariush entered. He wore the formal robes of an heir, deep purple trimmed with gold, bearing the symbols of his bloodline. He looked so small in the massive hall, so vulnerable. But he walked with his head high, his hands steady. When he reached the center of the floor, he turned to face the council. Hormuz spoke first, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. "Members of the council, we gather today to determine the future of our pack. Prince Dariush stands accused of being unfit to rule. He has failed to speak for 9 years, failed to present his wolf, and has allowed himself to be corrupted by an Omega who used forbidden magic to control his mind." He gestured toward Nasreen with contempt. "The evidence is clear. The boy cannot lead. I call for an immediate vote of succession." Murmurs rippled through the alphas. Many nodded in agreement. But Sharok raised his hand and silence fell. "Before any vote is taken, my son has invoked his right of first voice. By ancient law, he is entitled to speak in his own defense. This right cannot be denied." The king looked at Dariush, and there was so much love in his eyes. "The floor is yours, my son." Dariush took a breath. Nasreen wanted desperately to send him encouragement through their bond, but the collar prevented it. She could only watch, her heart in her throat, as this small boy faced down the most powerful wolves in the realm. "My name is Dariush," he began, and his voice was quiet but clear. "I am the son of Sharak of the ancient bloodline, and I am the heir to the throne." Some alphas leaned forward surprised. Others exchanged skeptical glances. "I know what you think of me," Dariush continued, and his voice grew stronger. "You think I am weak because I did not speak. You think I am broken because my wolf has not emerged. You think I need others to think for me, to make decisions for me." He paused. "You are wrong." Hormuz's expression darkened. "I did not speak because the language you wanted me to use felt like a prison. You wanted me to command, to dominate, to prove my strength through aggression. But that is not who I am. That is not what a true leader should be." Dariush's eyes swept the room. "A true leader listens. A true leader sees the value in every member of the pack, even the ones you have rejected. Even the ones you call cursed." Nasreen's breath caught. "Nasreen did not corrupt me with forbidden magic. She taught me that there are many ways to communicate, many ways to lead. She showed me that my difference was not a weakness, it was a strength. Because I can speak the old language, the language of our ancestors, the language that creates bonds of perfect understanding between wolves." He looked directly at Hormuz. "You call this dark magic because you fear it. But it is simply communication at its purest form. And yes, I bonded with Nasreen through it. Because she was the first person who truly listened to me. The first person who saw me as I am, not as you wanted me to be." The hall erupted in whispers. Some alphas looked intrigued. Others looked horrified. Hormuz stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This proves my point exactly. The boy admits to practicing forbidden arts. He admits to forming an inappropriate bond with an Omega. This is not the behavior of a king. This is the behavior of a child who cannot control himself." "No." Dariush's voice cut through the noise like a blade. And when he spoke again, there was power in it, the unmistakable presence of an alpha. "This is the behavior of a wolf who refuses to let others define his worth. You want to judge me because I am different. You want to remove me because I do not fit your narrow definition of strength. But I am strong. Strong enough to stand here and speak my truth. Strong enough to fight for the people you have rejected. And strong enough to lead this pack into a future where difference is celebrated, not feared." For a moment the hall was silent. Then Dariush did something no one expected. His eyes began to glow, not gold like his father's but silver. The color of the moon. The color of the ancient bloodlines. And his wolf emerged. It didn't happen the way it usually did for young wolves. There was no painful shift, no awkward half-transformation. One moment Dariush stood in human form. The next, a wolf cub sat in his place, silver-furred and ethereal, its eyes holding the same fierce intelligence. The hall gasped, because the color of Dariush's wolf marked him as something rare, something special. A throwback to the oldest bloodlines, the ones that had existed before packs and politics divided them. A wolf of prophecy. Hormuz looked like he'd been struck. "This is impossible." But Sharak was smiling, tears streaming down his face. "This is my son. This is your future king." The wolf cub looked around the hall, and when it opened its mouth, everyone heard the voice. Not with ears but with minds. The old language, speaking directly to their souls. "I am Dariush. I am the heir. And I will lead this pack with strength, with wisdom, and with compassion for all our wolves, even the rejected ones, even the cursed ones. 'Cause that is what true leadership means." One by one, the alphas in the hall bowed their heads. Even those who had supported Hormuz, even those who had called for Dariush's removal, could not deny what they were witnessing. A wolf of prophecy had emerged. The old language had returned. And the small, silent boy they had dismissed was revealing himself to be something far greater than they had imagined. Hormuz stood alone, his ambitions crumbling around him. Sharok rose from his throne. The council will vote. All in favor of maintaining Prince Dariush as heir. A forest of hands rose. All opposed. Only 3 hands, Hormuz and 2 of his closest allies. It was over. The king's voice rang out. By the will of this council and by the ancient laws of our pack, Prince Dariush is confirmed as heir to the throne. His place in the succession is secured. The hall erupted in cheers, some genuine, some merely political, but all acknowledging the new reality. And Dariush shifted back into human form, standing naked and vulnerable but victorious in the center of the hall. He looked across the room to where Nasreen stood in chains. Their eyes met, and even without the bond, she could read his intention. "I have one more thing to say," Dariush called out, silencing the celebration. "As heir, I invoke my right to clemency. I ask this council to pardon Nasreen of all charges. She saved my life. She gave me the tools to become who I am meant to be. And I will not allow her to be executed for that." The hall fell silent again. Farrak stepped forward, his expression conflicted. "My prince, the use of the old language is still forbidden by law. We cannot simply then change the law." Dariush's voice was absolute. "I am living proof that the old language is not dark magic. It is communication. It is connection. And if this pack is going to move forward, we must stop fearing the gifts our ancestors gave us." Sharok looked at his son with undisguised pride. Then he turned to the council. "The heir has spoken. Let us vote. All in favor of pardoning the Omega Nasreen and lifting the prohibition on the old language." This vote was closer. Many alphas were still uncomfortable with changing such ancient laws. But in the end, the majority sided with their new heir. Nasreen felt the chains fall away, felt the iron collar unlock and tumble to the ground. And the moment it did, the bond rushed back like a tidal wave. "We did it," Dariush sent, his joy brilliant and pure. "We won." Nasreen's knees buckled, but guards caught her before she fell. Through tears she sent back, "No. You won. You were incredible. He insisted. Together. Always." In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Hormuz was exiled from the capital for his attempt to manipulate the succession. The council, humbled by their nearly catastrophic mistake, began the long process of updating the old laws. The prohibition on the old language was lifted, and scholars were commissioned to recover the lost texts and teach the younger generations. Dariush began his formal training as heir, and he proved himself brilliant. He spoke now with increasing confidence, using both the traditional language and the old language depending on what the situation required. His ability to form bonds of perfect understanding with key members of the pack made him a natural diplomat. Those who had doubted him became his strongest supporters. And Nasreen became the royal language keeper, a position that had not existed for 2 centuries. She was given chambers in the palace, access to all the resources she needed, and the authority to teach the old language to anyone who showed aptitude for it. But more than that, she became Dariush's constant companion. As he grew, as he learned, she was always there, not as a teacher anymore but as something more. Something the pack did not yet have a name for. On Dariush's 10th birthday, a celebration was held throughout the capital. He spoke to the gathered crowds with eloquence, demonstrating beyond any doubt that he was ready to one day take his father's place. That night, when the festivities finally ended, Dariush found Nasreen in the garden where they had first truly connected. She stood among the winter roses, her face tilted toward the stars. "Nasreen." She turned, smiling at him. He had grown in the months since the trial, was beginning to show the first signs of the man he would become. "You were magnificent today," she said. "Your father was so proud. I couldn't have done any of it without you." He moved to stand beside her. Through their bond, she felt his nervousness. "Nasreen, I've been thinking about the future. Oh, when I turn 18, I'll be able to take a mate. to form an official bond. He looked at her, his young face serious. I know I'm still just a child to you now. I know you probably see me as a student, someone you helped because it was your duty. He took a breath. But in 8 years, when I'm old enough, I'm going to ask you to be my mate. Officially. For everyone to see. Nasreen's heart clenched. Dariush. I know what they'll say. That you're cursed. That you're too old for me. That our bond is inappropriate. His eyes blazed with silver light. I don't care. You're the person who saw me when no one else would. You're the person who taught me that difference is strength. And you're the person I want beside me when I rule. He reached for her hand. So I'm telling you now, so you have time to decide. In 8 years I'm going to ask. And I really, really hope you'll say yes. Nasreen looked at this boy. This impossibly brave, impossibly kind boy. And felt her chest fill with a feeling she couldn't quite name. It wasn't romantic love, not yet. He was still too young for that. But it was something deeper. A recognition of souls. A promise of what could be. Ask me again in 8 years, she said softly. And we'll see. He grinned, and through the bond, she felt his absolute certainty. He would ask. And somehow she knew her answer would be yes. But that is a story for another time. Tonight, as Nasreen stood in the garden with the future king, as the winter roses bloomed impossibly around them and the stars wheeled overhead, she allowed herself to believe in something she had never believed before. That she was not cursed. That she was not broken. That she had always been speaking a language others simply needed to learn. And that sometimes the most powerful magic in the world was simply being seen. The pack had learned its lesson. Dariush had found his voice. And Nasreen, the rejected Omega who had been told her entire life that she would never be enough, had discovered that she was not just enough. She was exactly what was needed. The secret language had always been there, waiting. It just took a silent boy and a cursed teacher to finally speak it aloud. And somewhere in the palace, in a throne room lined with the bones of ancestors, the Alpha King Sharok smiled. Because his son would be a great leader. Not despite his difference but because of it. The future was bright. But it was also uncertain. Because in the distant mountains, in the territories that bordered the pack lands, something stirred. A darkness that had been sleeping for generations, drawn back into waking by the emergence of a silver wolf and the return of the old language. The ancient enemy had felt the shift in power. And it was coming. But that... well, that is definitely a story for another time. For now, under the stars, a boy and a woman stood connected by a bond that would one day change the world. And that was enough. What happens next? Will Dariush and Nasreen's bond survive the coming darkness? What is the ancient enemy awakening in the mountains? And when Dariush finally turns 18, will Nasreen accept his proposal? Or will the pack's prejudices tear them apart? The next chapter of their story is waiting. But only time will reveal whether the secret language they share is powerful enough to save them both. Until then, remember. Sometimes the most